Snow lays across the eaves like a slow, white breath, and at the heart of the moss garden a small stone lantern keeps its watch, a square of warm light that holds the evening together. The house beside the path is not a temple in the formal sense, and yet there is a templiness to the way light and water and quiet gather here. Moss threads the stones between the stepping slabs. It climbs the low wall in pale, patient patches, and, under the lantern, a ring of darker green looks as if it were set aside for keeping time. People who have stayed long enough learn to speak of the place by its one name, the Moss Garden Temple. It is what the innkeeper calls it when she jokes with apprentices, and what the neighbors say when they mean the house that keeps its promises. The innkeeper arrives as evening deepens, not in a hurry, but with the economy of motion that comes from many years of routine. The same hands that fold futons, that coax embers from brazier coals, that lift the lid from the kettle and listen for the first soft note of boiling. Her coat sheds a few wet beads of snow as she crosses the threshold, and the Norrin, that entrance curtain with its single slit, stirs and reminds the house of the world outside. Inside, the rooms are scaled to the human body. Low beams, a lattice of shoji screens whose paper has been softened by years of steam and light. The engawa running like a finger of wood between room and garden, where one can sit with tea and watch steam rise. The onsen, an old, steady spring that feeds a private bathing room, sends a thin plume of warmth through the house. Its taste is in the air, an easy, mineral thing, and it settles against the bones of the building like a familiar voice. If this evening calls to you, linger with us. There is a gentleness to the choreography of the place. The innkeeper moves from task to task with a small, clear order. Coals to the brazier, kettle to the flame, futon fluffed and set by the edge of the tatami, a mat smoothed with the flat of the hand. A cat, round as a darning egg, unrolls itself from a cushion and pads to the engawa to watch, as if keeping company with whatever comes through the garden. The household objects here are patient companions, a lacquered bowl for rice, a small iron ladle for the onsen, a wooden plane dulled by the oil of many hands. Each object has a place and a story. The innkeeper knows where the waxed thread is kept, wrapped in a scrap of indigo cotton, and she knows which blade will glint without biting. There are knives for cleaning fish, chisels for removing old pegs, brushes for smoothing glue. The neighbors begin to arrive as the light thins. They do not come with ceremony. They come with things in their hands. An elder whose satchel contains preserved slices of daikon, fragrant and dark from winter store. A gardener with bundles of twigs and a little jar of resin. A carpenter with a narrow box of planes and a roll of coarse linen. Apprentices whose pockets are full of curiosity and a few tools borrowed from their fathers. They move around one another with the ease of people who have shared thresholds for years. Tea is poured. The kettle sings in the same hollow as a clock. The sound marks the beginning of what will follow. Conversation unfolds as if it too were a kind of mending. Small stories, shared recipes for a stubborn stain, the precise rhythm of a knot that will not slip. The elder speaks in a low, steady voice, the sort that carries farther than loud words. He places a preserved slice on a little plate and offers it round. The salt and the slight smoke of the daikon settle the room the way only a very old food can. From the garden, a neighbor unwraps a sprig of pine that still smells of frost, and the gardener says, almost apologetic, that the moss by the lower stepping stone has thinned this year. There is, he thinks, a place where someone walked too often. Children are not present this evening, but the apprentices bring the shy attention that belongs to younger hands, eyes tracing the grain of a plank, fingers curling at the edge of a plane's mouth. It is always something small that calls a community to repair. Great disasters make themselves loud. Minor breaches are quieter, but their very smallness asks more of a place. A torn noren is not a calamity. It is a sign that the house, which keeps people sheltered and the simple rhythms of life, needs attention. The innkeeper discovers the tear at the threshold as she brushes snow from her sleeves. The split is along the fold where hands have parted the curtain for years. The fabric there is softened by many palms. A thin seam has unpicked itself, leaving an honest gap through which evening draughts find their way. Just beyond, by the bathing room, a sheet of shoji paper dents when the innkeeper presses. The paper has become damp and clouded by the onsen's breath, and shows a faint swell and a hairline sag where the wooden lattice has taken up moisture. On the engawa, at the garden edge, one plank has warped with winters, and needs a new face. These are trifles to a stranger passing. To a house they are invitations. The innkeeper pins the noren back with a temporary stitch and sets a kettle on. She sends a neighbor with a message both plain and exact. Bring planes, bring thread, bring a clean sheet of washi paper for the shoji. The word travels with the soft urgency of a bell. Soon the carpenter's box is unpacked on the low table, its planes lying like quiet tools of intent. Apprentices sit close to watch. Mending here is not concealment. It is not a desire to erase age or to hide the hand that has made something functional. Rather, the practice is to make visible the care it took to repair. Visible stitches, neat but not invisible, are markers. Each loop a small public history of labor, a line that tells anyone who passes that someone has been here and made time for this place. The innkeeper, with hands stained faintly from tea and ink, prepares to sew. She cuts a piece of indigo fabric, reclaimed cloth from an old kimono, intended not to match, but to speak to the noren's wear. The patch will be placed with a seam that resists neatness in favor of honesty, its thread slightly lighter, so that each stitch is a line drawn into the fabric's life. Waxed thread is prepared on an apprentice's lap. He unwinds a length with the care of someone entrusted with a secret. Wax on his fingers leaves a thin, shining trace. The innkeeper shows the apprentices how to set the thread on the needle, how to make a knot that will not slip but will sit as if it has always belonged to the fabric. There is a small ritual of knots. The first is a simple anchor, the second a double loop, a memory of the way roofs overlap. Hands move slowly. Conversation drops to a quieter pitch to match. Across the room, the carpenter sets up his plane and a plank of oak on sawhorses. He raises his plane and lets it fall across the grain, not in a single forceful stroke but in many small, patient passes that take, thin as the curl of a shaving. The shavings fall in pale, wood-sweet ribbons, and the apprentice who watches unwraps his fingers and lets the fragrance of fresh-cut oak take the air. Planing is a practice of attention. The plane must be held at an angle that matches the wood's temper, and the rhythm is between hand and grain, a tacit conversation. The carpenter speaks in the language of measurement that is not precise in numbers but muscle. Feel for the resistance. Hear the change in the plane's note. Look for the curl that indicates the blade kisses the grain. The gardener brings a small jar of resin and a trick for warping. He explains that a plank left too long in the house will take on the house's breath, swelling where steam is constant, shrinking where sun finds the wood. He demonstrates a method. Warm the resin. Rub it into the plank's edge, and the resin will sit in the pores of the wood to hold warmth and slow the change. There is a humility in such tricks, an admission that everything here is in flux and that keeping it is constant persuasion, not mastery over nature. Tea is poured again, and the kettle's sigh fills the pauses between tasks. Food is set out. A bowl of rice that steadies those tired from work, small salted vegetables, a plate of the elder's preserved daikon which tastes of winter sun folded into roots. The innkeeper moves a futon for a young apprentice so he might sit on the floor with his back against the ingawa and learn not only by watching but by being placed in the pulse of the house. Conversation wanders from the practical, where best to set the grommets for the Norin patch, to the small lore of tools. The carpenter recalls a plane once kept in a neighbor's house that had been passed down in a queer way, its handle smoothed into a particular angle by a line of different hands. The elder tells a short story about a roof that was let go for a year, and how, when it was mended, the first rain sounded unfamiliar. This anecdote has a moral only in the sense that letting things go changes how they come back. Mending is also teaching. The apprentices, that ring of newer hands, are taught not with lectures but with demonstration, with slow, repeatable gestures. The innkeeper shows one how to lay the patch, so the grain of the cloth reads across the Norin in a certain way. The carpenter shows another the micro-adjustments that make a wedge hold a plank snug against its frame. A boy watches the way the elder threads a needle, and the elder notices the watching and tells him quietly that his first stitches will be clumsy, and that clumsy stitches are honest. There is a kind of permission in those words, a small reprieve from the need to be perfect. Time stretches with work. An hour passes that feels as if it might be only a breath. Lanterns are lit in the garden and inside. Their light is not to conquer the dark, but to shape it. Each lantern throwing warm squares across the tatami that become islands of task. The cat slips between the legs of workers and pauses on the patchwork of the Norin to examine the new thread as if it were a thing of interest. Steam rises from the onsen in gentle columns that catch the lantern light and become faint, moving veils. Outside, the snow hushes the road. Inside, voices are low, and the clink of tools keeps a steady measure. There are particular tasks that require a concentration that makes the rest of the world fall away. The innkeeper's stitching is one. She draws the needle with a slow, decisive motion, the waxed thread leaving tiny glints where it crosses the indigo patch. Each stitch is pulled taut enough to hold but not so taut that the fabric puckers. She prefers visible work, where each line will read like a small seam of memory. An apprentice sits beside her, taking the rhythm into his bones. In, through, across, not. The elder comments on the way the stitches will catch the wind at the threshold, and in doing so, will tell travelers that this place has had hands meet it. Nearby, the carpenter evaluates the warped engawa plank. He places the new, planed oak alongside the old, and fits it into the frame to check the line. A woodworker's eye, shading the light with a hand, tilting the plank, discerns the subtlest warp. The carpenter marks where he will cut, and with a few patient strikes of a chisel he removes the old wedges that held the plank. The sounds are small. The chisels tap, the planes scrape, a rasp on the edge. Each noise is a punctuation in the evening's sentence. At some point, the innkeeper goes to the onsen to check the water and to make sure the bath is ready for whoever might come. The onsen room is steamed and soft. The shoji there is clouded almost to translucence. She wipes a hand across the paper to see the shadow of her palm, and to check that there is no hole in the lattice that would let a cold breath through. The practice of the onsen is itself a kind of tending, removing mineral buildup from the rim, sweeping the stones around the tub, watching the water's surface for a clarity that will welcome a tired guest. She thinks of the traveler who might come. The house is not expecting anyone yet, but houses keep space for strangers as a matter of course. As the night deepens, the repairs proceed in a quiet sequence. The noren takes its patch, and the innkeeper sews the main seam. She leaves the stitches with a small gap at the bottom as a deliberate gesture, an opening that will allow the curtain to breathe. The carpenter planes the final face of the plank so that the edge meets the frame without a gap. Shavings fall and collect like pale confetti. The gardener rubs resin into the plank's edge as the carpenter fits it into place, and the apron of the house takes the new wood as if it were an old friend returned. Apprentices are given small jobs. One is asked to hold the wedge while the carpenter taps it home. Another to sand the plank's face when it is finally in. The sand passes over wood like a hand smoothing an answer. There is a moment, as work slows, when the community pauses to share more deliberate food. A low plate is set at the center of the table. Rice, a little miso soup, pickles, and the elder's daikon. The meal does not celebrate any single achievement. It is the modest reward of shared labor, a way of bringing the hands together in warmth. The innkeeper offers a bowl to each person, and they eat with the soft focus of people who have been close to the same delicate work. The lanterns tremble when a foot passes near. Steam from the soup joins the onsen breath and becomes a common atmosphere. Even as repairs are made, small surprises complicate the evening. When the carpenter pulls the old plank free, he finds, tucked under the joist, a scrap of paper, yellowed, folded, bearing a child's small drawing. It is nothing of consequence, only a rough sketch of a cat and the name of a child written in a hand that has since grown. The discovery creates a ripple of tenderness. The elder smiles. He says that finding such things is a good omen for a house, a sign that it has been loved by hands that will return to mend it. The apprentices pass the scrap between them with reverence, and lay it near the noren's patched seam as if the two acts of care belong together. Night grows thicker and the road stays empty, but that is exactly when the house shows itself most open. The lantern light makes the moss garden a landscape of breath. Each stone throws a low shadow, and the path between them reads like a river. Inside, the innkeeper moves slowly to finish a detail. A small brass grommet is set into the noren where the patch will sit, so that a pull rope may be tied without tearing the cloth. The apprentice holds a hammer with the awkward, careful grip of someone learning to temper force. He taps, and the grommet finds its place with a soft ring. The innkeeper threads a small rope and ties it with a knot the elder taught her. A knot whose form is simple and which will hold through years of use. There is a particular kind of hush when the last visible piece of work is done. Tools are wiped and returned to their boxes. Planes are oiled. Waxed thread is rolled back into indigo cloth and stowed away. Yet the repairs are not quite complete. Some sanding will wait for morning light. Final wedges will be driven at dawn. But a threshold has been crossed from unmade to tended. The house exhales. The cat stretches and curls and claims the warmest patch on the floor. It is then, as the community settles into a softer rhythm, that a figure arrives on the road. The knock is small, almost tentative, and the silhouettes through the shoji show a traveler bearing a wet cloak. The innkeeper opens the door, and a young stranger stands under the lantern, snow in his hair, gratitude clear in his posture. He does not announce himself with claims or stories. He is simply tired and in need of a place to warm his hands. He offers a small folded coin as a modest payment, more a gesture of courtesy than a true measure of hospitality. And the innkeeper shakes her head gently. Hospitality here is a practice older than transactions. It is the giving of a place to rest and the receiving of an outstretched hand into a shared rhythm. The stranger steps inside, and the house takes him as it takes every small, humble thing, with steadiness and a mild curiosity. He is led to the onsen to remove the cold from his joints, and then to a futon that has been prepared in the quiet room overlooking the moss. Tea is given without fuss. A bowl of rice is set before him, and he eats with a reserve that is almost shy. Conversation is light, the kind that circles like the steam from the tea. Where are you from? How did you find the lane? Are you traveling alone? He answers in short, honest lines. He speaks of a market town to the south and of a decision to stay on the road for a while. He says nothing dramatic. His need is simple, and the house supplies in kind. The arrival of the stranger does not halt work, but it alters its rhythm. The innkeeper checks the patched Norin with one last look. She stands at the threshold and watches how the light falls through the new stitches. The carpenter finishes his fit of the plank, but leaves a small task undone, intending to return at dawn when the house will have its full measure of light, and when wood will reveal its true line. Apprentices clear the floor and set bowls away. Outside, the moss garden drinks in the residue of lantern heat, and the snow on the stones breathes slowly. There is a snugness to the evening that comes from the knowing that things are mended enough for now, and that there will be more tending when morning comes. The stranger's presence offers a kind of proof that the house, with its patched Norin, its repapered shoji, its new plank waiting to be fully bedded, remains a place where the edge between outside and shelter is practiced rather than assumed. By the time the last plate is washed and set upon its rack, the house gathers the small marks of the day into a quiet map. Lanterns are lowered so they're light pools rather than storms. The brazier is banked to coals. Futons are arranged with a decisive lightness. The innkeeper walks the engawa and sets a small stone under the lantern where the moss is thickest, as if arranging an offering to the night that is simply the house's willingness to be kept. She stands for a moment and listens to the subtle noises that follow a communal task. A drawer closing, a breath exhaled, the faint scrape of wood settling as it cools. There are stories that will be told in the morning, about the way a knot held under hammer, about the scrap of a child's drawing, about how the resin caught a certain light. Apprentices will remember the feel of a plane that evening and keep those movements in their palms as a study. The innkeeper will sleep with an awareness that the house is a living thing, its needs cyclical and modest, and that each repair is both an act of maintenance and of memory. Outside, the snow keeps the road silent. The stone lantern makes a small pool of warmth on its cushion of moss and sends a thin halo into the night. In that glow, the Norin's new stitches cast delicate shadows, like calligraphy written in thread. The carpenter's workshop waits with tools laid out in the order he will need at dawn. The stranger sleeps with the steady, uncomplicated breathing of someone restored, the futon upholding him as a small raft in a dark sea. The evening is settled but not complete. There remains the last wedge to be driven, a final sanding that will reveal the grain's true line. There is the apprentice who still worries at the knot that will not lie flat. And there is, somewhere between the lantern and the moss, a sense that this house, this moss-garden temple, does more than provide shelter. It translates labor into sanctuary. It teaches the simple doctrine that attention, given consistently and without fanfare, becomes a form of ancient peace. At the threshold of night, the innkeeper sits for a while in the engawa and looks into the garden. Steam from the onsen draws a thin veil across the stones and a breeze skims the moss. She pulls her hands together and rubs them to warm the knuckles that have been used that day to plane, to stitch, to secure. Her hands are small and capable. They know the weight of a tool and the tenderness of a thread. She thinks of mornings to come, the carpenter's return at light, the apprentice's attempts at new knots, the elder's shorter stories warmed by the day's labor. Someone knocks again, softer this time, and there is a shadow at the shoji that makes the innkeeper rise and open a sliding panel a fraction. It is a neighbor with an oddment, an old iron hook that might fit the bath's handle, something the elder thought to pass along. He stands with the hook in his palm and the breath-painted air about his brow. He lifts his chin and says simply, as if naming a shared truth, that a house is made by these small offerings. The innkeeper accepts the hook, and the carpenter, who has been walking the length of the engawa as if mapping the night, takes it to the bath to see if it will fit. He returns with a small nod that says, "This will do." There are gestures here that require no more than a look. An apprentice who needs someone to show him the right way to set a wedge is given a hand. A neighbor who cannot stay long leaves a poem in a folded scrap for the elder. The community's life is threaded through by these small exchanges. And yet, even as the night rolls in and hands settle, the work is only partly finished. The noren's visible stitch holds, but the grommet must be tested a season from now. The engawa plank fits, but will need a final wedge at dawn. The shoji paper is partly prepared for pasting, but the final brushing of glue and the patient smoothing with a damp cloth is a task for daylight when the washi will be judged against true light. The stranger sleeps near the moss and the house breathes around him. But his story, what brought him along the road, how long he will stay, the ways his quiet presence might shape the apprentice's understandings of hospitality, remains to be told. There is a particular patience in that incompletion. It is a household practice to leave certain small seams open to morning, to allow the light to test work and to give the apprentice space to come with fresh attention. It is an acknowledgement that the shape of repair is not always a neat end, but a rhythm that continues. The moss garden temple sits, lit by the lantern, ringed by moss, held together by stitches and planks and the soft labor of people who take care, and waits for dawn to finish its quiet prayers. Outside, snow softens the garden's edges, and the lantern casts its last square of light into the evening. Inside, the brazier glows like a slow ember, and the house maps the day's acts into the tired lines of those who cared for it. The innkeeper moves to lay a hand against the noren where her patch rests. She feels the thread, the wool beneath the stitches, and she presses lightly, as if to say thank you to a thing that has kept them all this year. Then she moves away to the futon she will share with no one tonight. And, as the house quiets, the unanswered pieces of labor remain like promises, soft, patient, and waiting for a morning that will test the strength of waxed thread and the fit of a plank. Dawn comes with a slow, cool clarity that feels almost deliberate, as if the day itself takes a moment to unroll. The lanterns outside have burned down to soft orange beads. The moss garden is a study in muted greens, each stone edged by pale frost and each patch of moss holding a separate, patient texture. Light slides up the white of the shoji and finds the grain of wood. It pools along the engawa where the new plank waits like a quiet promise. The house seems to exhale into the morning. The faint steam from the onsen lifting and thinning until it disperses into the thin air above the roof. The carpenter arrives without fanfare. His boots make a small sound against the packed snow on the path, a sound that the innkeeper already knows and recognizes as a beginning. He carries a small bundle of tools, chisels wrapped in old linen, a mallet with a softened handle, a tri-square with a corner nicked by long use. He does not hurry. He sets his things on the low bench of the engawa and kneels to test the plank's fit. The new oak, whose face last night had still smelled of fresh shavings, has settled, and in the morning light the grain reads like a pale river. He lays the plank in place, checks its line against the threshold, and rubs his thumb along the edge as if reading the wood's readiness. An apprentice comes with him, younger than the others, fingers still learning how to hold a plane without gripping too tight. The carpenter demonstrates the wedge one last time. His movements are economical and full of small information. How the wedge sits at the right angle to catch the plank without splitting it. The firmness of the mallet that will send the wedge home without a hammer's harshness. The way a craftsman listens to the change in sound as a plank finds its true seat. He asks the apprentice to hold the wedge, to feel its receiving vibration. The boy's palms tremble slightly, not from cold, but from the sense of so much responsibility held in a small wooden shim. The wedge goes home with a series of measured taps. The carpenter times them against the house's breath. One tap, a pause to hear the settling. Another, a final, confident stroke that leaves the plank seated like an answer. The sound is much softer than the mallet would have made an hour before. The wood has accepted the new partner. Shavings that had curled on the bench yawn and thin as the carpenter takes a few final passes to marry the plank to its frame. He checks the plane's profile, lays the blade flat with the back of his hand to feel for burrs, and then allows the apprentice to make the first small cut. The apprentice's plane squeaks at first, and then finds a small, steady voice. The curl of wood is thin and translucent as the morning light slips through it. Outside, the gardener moves among the stepping stones with a pail and a soft whisk broom. He rinses the mossed edges with a careful hand, scattering a fine spray so that each tuft darkens and closes around its base. He knows those mosses by touch as much as sight, where they hold, where they thin, where small footsteps have frayed them. He bends to the lowest stone and brushes away the thin crust of last night's frost, revealing the deeper greens beneath. Then he runs water down a channel he has made between two stones to encourage a new pathway where footfall will be gentlest. He is not trying to sculpt beauty so much as guide endurance. The moss must be permitted to grow where it is supported, and where it is worn, a lighter tread should be taught. Back inside, the innkeeper prepares the shoji frame for its final dressing. The paper last night had been affixed partially. The outer edge still held a faint ripple where glue had not yet met grain. She has a shallow bowl of paste at hand, a simple paste made of rice flour and water that thickens to a translucent glue when warmed. It is mixed without fuss, the right viscosity checked on the end of a stick. Too wet, and it will soak the paper and tear. Too dry, and it will not adhere. She dips a long brush and lays the paste along the wooden laths with sure, even strokes. The apprentice who had held the wedge yesterday watches her hand, trying to map the pressure of a brush across a rib of wood. They lift the sheet of washi, thin, fibrous paper that will read light the way skin does, and the innkeeper lays it gently across the frame. The motion is like the laying of a calm palm over a sleeping face, and the paper clings to the frame in a hush. She uses a damp cloth to smooth the sheet, moving from the center to the edges, each stroke pushing air and paste into a union. The apprentice runs the cloth after her, pressing the washi into the corners where the lattice meets the beam, feeling the paper take to the frame as if it has found its home. When she lifts the cloth, small wrinkles flatten, and the paper shines faintly where the adhesive has sealed it to the wood. Meanwhile, another apprentice is given the task of trimming the paper's surplus. He holds a long, straight razor, careful but with a small excitement that broadens his fingers, and the carpenter instructs him on the line to cut. The blade slides, and strips of washi fall away like translucent confetti, leaving an edge that meets the frame with clean obedience. It is a simple task, but the concentration is severe. One wrong angle and the paper will fray. One slip and the margin will be compromised. He does not slip. His hand moves with a steadier confidence than the day before. The norin, which had been patched the night before, is inspected in the new light. The innkeeper holds it by the top, letting it fall free to see how the weight of the patch draws the cloth. The visible stitches are there, precise, honest, and in the morning the indigo patch reads more like a deliberate mark than a repair. It pulls the eye in a pleasing way. A traveler passing might not notice the exact technique, but would see the proud seam of someone's care. The innkeeper pins a small loop near the grommet, and threads a rope whose fibers the elder had twisted at the communal hearth. The knot the elder taught her, practical with a quiet geometry, sits tight and purposeful. The hourglass is turned. It has been a tacit mark of the house's rhythm for years. When work stretches into the morning, someone flips the glass and measures tasks against its run. Today, flipping the hourglass is an acknowledgement that the house takes time as an ally, not to rush a task, not to force an answer, but to allow time to participate. The sand begins to fall, a small steady line that the apprentices watch as if it were a slow metronome. It shapes the work. 5 more strokes of the plane, 3 more taps, a wet cloth here, a final test there. Outside, the stranger, now bright-eyed with sleep and a clearer gait from the onsen's warmth, stirs and rises. He has watched the house's life at a distance. He eats a modest breakfast, rice, miso, strips of the elder's preserved daikon, and offers in return a little story. He speaks of a market where people barter for the shape of things rather than their price, and he says, with a small laugh, that he has been learning which goods hold for longer. His coin, which he had once unfurled as a courtesy, is tucked into a corner of a sash. The innkeeper refuses any payment beyond his company, and allows him instead to leave a note in the house's small ledger. A simple line, his name and a date, a short gratitude. The elder takes the note with a kindly nod and slips it into a drawer where similar scraps are kept like a town's memory. There is a social grace to departures here. When travelers leave, they do not need speeches. They need acknowledgement, a small forwardness of goodwill. The innkeeper wraps a small packet of pickles and places it in the stranger's hand for the journey. He bows with a modest and genuine humility, and steps into the path where the snow has begun to melt in the morning sun. The stone lantern throws a low ellipse of shadow across his feet as he passes, and the gardener steps aside to show the gentlest path across the moss. He walks slowly, stamping a little to warm his toes. He waves once at the house, and the house replies by holding its door slightly open until he is out of hearing. That open door is the small embrace that keeps being repeated in this place. Inside, the final sanding begins in earnest. The apprentice who had made the clean cut on the washi is given a block of fine sandpaper. His strokes move along the plank like a hand remembering a face. The wood grows warm under the paper, and grain rises as if acknowledging attention. The carpenter checks the fit, runs a finger along the seam for any prick, for any whispering gap, then draws a thin bead of wax along the edge. The wax deepens the tone of the wood and seals the small exposed fibers. He tests the board with a slow sliding motion, as though speaking with the house. The Ngawa answers with a quiet glide. When the door moves as it should, neither loose nor crisp, but with the soft acquiescence of long acquaintance, there is a small, shared awareness of a job well tended. Not finished as an end, but tended until it fit. A short demonstration follows, an apprenticeship hallmark. One apprentice is asked to retie the grommet rope with the knot just shown to him. He does so, hands slightly unsteady, and the elder leans forward and, with a quick, kind correction, shows a minor twist that will prevent slippage. The correction is made almost without words. The elder's fingers alter the rope, and the knot finds a place it likes. The apprentice repeats the motion, and this time the knot sits with a quiet professionalism that tightens something in his chest. He has moved from watching to being part of the rhythm. Food gathers once more, though lightly. A bowl of rice shared in the morning is different from evening's meal. It is plain and clear, the kind that sharpens rather than lulls. The innkeeper slices a piece of the elder's preserved daikon and shares it with the carpenter and the gardener. Conversation is practical and small. When will the apprentice come on Tuesday to learn about plane sharpening? Can the neighbor bring a spare latch for the bath door? Did anyone see where the child's drawing was placed so it might be kept safe? Each line of talk weaves practicality into care. The cat is given a crisp strip of fish and disdains the plate in favor of the bench, claiming there the warmth of the sun that has just reached its face through the shoji. After the meal, the elder calls everyone to a small circle by the low table. He is not one for long sermons. Today, he offers a short observation more like a proverb than a lecture. A few carefully chosen words that have the weight of time. He says, simply, that a house that is mended in sight is a place that teaches people to return. His line is not a demand, but a description. Visible care draws visible habit. The apprentices nod. The carpenter smiles and says nothing. His hands still smell of shavings and resin, which is enough speech for him. They take a moment, as is habit here, to place the child's drawing on a small shelf near the Norin's patch. It is not set to occupy any honored position, but it is placed where hands passing the threshold will see it and remember. The elder taps the paper gently, as if to bless it with a very simple attention. That gesture is the house's small benediction. No prayer, no claim of sanctity, only the recognition that things keep human history in quiet folds. By mid-morning, the carpenter reclaims his tools and starts on a small finishing flourish. He bores a tiny recess into the underside of the Ngawa to allow a thin drain channel. a thoughtful measure that will stop water collecting in the frame when the rains begin. The whole is neat and unostentatious, hidden where it will do work without being seen. He demonstrates the thinking behind it. Craft is not simply the visible finish, but the intelligence of prevention. The apprentice watches, straining to remember the sequence, the angle of the drill, the depth that will protect but not weaken. The carpenter smiles and lets him hold the tool for one light turn, and the young hand moves under guidance. When the small tasks are gathered and stowed away, a final communal clean takes place. Brooms sweep in an unhurried chorus. Cloths wipe the low table until it glows faintly with use. Pots are rinsed, the place is aired, and a small pile of recycled fabric is folded into a neat bundle for future patches. The innkeeper stands and loosens her sleeves, taking in the room with one assessing look. She moves through the house like someone reading a well-loved book, scanning for the places where attention will be needed next. Her eyes rest on the Norin. The patch sits proud but welcoming, and then on the new plank, which matches the house well enough that the change reads as continuity. Before anyone disperses, there is a modest exchange of tools and promises. The carpenter offers to take an apprentice to his workshop the following week to learn the fine tuning of plane blades. The gardener asks if someone might spare a length of fishing line to bind a new trellis for the moss where a thin path will be needed. The elder stands and, with a slow, wry expression, offers a final, short line. That the house will always take as much as it gives, and that giving is often the easier thing. Everyone laughs softly because the line hides a truth known to each of them. Tending asks more of the giver than of the receiver, in ways that are both hard and heartening. The stranger's departure is small and tidy. He wraps his parcel against the cold, lifts his small bag, and promises to return with news from the market. Children, playing farther down the lane, who had been kept away from the night's repair, peep from behind a fence and wave at the carpenter and the innkeeper. One of them holds a new scrap of paper and a stub of pencil, and the apprentice who had placed the child's drawing overnight kneels and shows him how to make a little cat with 2 strokes and a circle. The child grins, pleased to be taught, and runs off to place his new mark in a safe corner of the lane. There is a short, gentle ritual the innkeeper observes before the afternoon settles. She walks the garden and sprinkles a little warm water at the base of the stone lantern where the moss is thickest. It is not an offering. She will not call it that. It is practice, an act of encouragement for something that grows slowly and asks only to be acknowledged. She smooths the edges of the stepping stones and leaves a scrap of cloth near the child's drawing as a place marker. Then she returns inside and lights one more lantern, not to chase the light but to bring an intimate scale to the house's face. As the sun slopes towards late afternoon, the apprentices gather around the Ngawa to try out their new, practiced skills. One takes a plane and removes hair-thin curls of wood with a confidence that surprises even him. Another reties the grommet rope with the elder watching, who nods as if to say that the knot holds a year's learning in a few loops. The innkeeper watches them with a look that is both tender and businesslike. She knows the difference between encouragement and the need to set a task aside for learning. She sets a small bowl of tea in the center, and the group pauses to drink, sharing the warmth and the aftertaste of starch and leaf. There is a final, small act before the day's closure, the relighting of the lanterns in the garden. The gardener, carrying a brass snuffer and a small oil can, moves from stone to stone, checking wicks and brightening the lantern light. He takes care to shape each small flame so that it throws light across the intended path and does not glare into the windows. The house wears its light like a well-chosen scarf. It warms, it guides, it invites. The hourglass sits on the table, its sand now scarcely a rim of glass. Someone will flip it tomorrow when another set of tasks begins. When evening returns, the house has the gentle fullness of work completed and of work that remains. The Ngawa plank is in place. The noren bears its indigo patch like a narrative stitch. The shoji shines with newly affixed washi. And the apprentices carry in their palms the knowledge that some tasks will be practiced for months before they are confidently completed. The stranger's ledger note is tucked into the elder's drawer, and will wait for a rainy afternoon when the elder likes to read such things aloud. As the last light leaves the sky, the innkeeper makes a small tour of the rooms. She checks the futons, fluffs them where needed, adjusts a brazier to hold steady embers. She runs a hand along the Ngawa where the carpentry meets the house's settling frame, and smiles at the way the wood has received the new piece. She steps out for a moment into the moss garden and breathes the clean, slow air. Steam from the onsen rises and meets the cool. Where the vapor crosses a lantern's light, it becomes a faint veil that the night wears like a scarf. The cat follows her and circles her legs as if to claim the evening as a seal of approval. Before the house sleeps, the elder asks for one last small gathering. It is not a ceremony in any formal sense. It is simply a practice of noticing. They sit with the tea at the low table, hands warmed and bodies eased of the day's small tightness. The elder offers a very short benediction, not a prayer, but an invocation of attention and gratitude. He says that the house will teach those who wish to learn how to be present, and that being present is the craft that holds all other crafts together. His voice is worn smooth by habit. His message is quiet, and the room listens as if it were an instrument tuning itself. The innkeeper places the child's drawing near the noren, as if to anchor it to the threshold. She touches the indigo patch with the tenderness of someone who knows the value of visible mending. The apprentices tidy tools and fold cloths, while the carpenter dips his hand into the onsen's water and rubs his face. A ritual of clearing grit and of refreshing attention. There is no grand summing up. The work has been done, and yet it is also ongoing, a pattern rather than a conclusion. Then the innkeeper speaks softly, addressing not only those around her but anyone who has been present in thought during the day's sequence. She says that the Moss Garden Temple is not a temple in the way one might think of stone halls or formal rites. Instead, she says, it is a place that becomes temple-like through the patience of keeping. The tone is humble, careful to avoid claiming a sanctity that does not exist. She merely notes that when a house is made careful, when stitches are visible and planks fit because hands have tended them, the place offers a kind of quiet that people sometimes call ancient peace. They take a breath together. It is a small guided pause that the elder has taught to many hands. 3 slow inhalations, each with a slight widening, and then a soft release. Breathe in, allowing the chest to fill as the onsen's steam fills the small room. Breathe out, letting the shoulders fall. Breathe in again, slowly, noticing the warmth of tea and the memory of shavings. Breathe out, feeling the tension move into the floor. Breathe in a third time, quietly, feeling the house's steady, careful pulse. Breathe out fully and rest the breath where it lingers like a small, worn coin in the palm. This shared breath is neither a practice of conversion nor doctrine. It is a way of sinking the body to the house's measure. The 3 breaths are ordinary, and their ordinariness is precisely their value. Each breath is a tiny lesson. Attention, steadiness, release. They finish the evening by relighting a single lantern that sits on the low step of the Ngawa, the light catching on the indigo patch and making the stitches throw delicate, linear shadows onto the snow outside. The cat curls by the brazier. The apprentices put away their tools for the night with the private pleasure of satisfying order. The carpenter collects his plane and offers the innkeeper a small, curt nod that expresses everything he might say in words of thanks. The innkeeper walks once more to the Norren, fingers trailing along the visible stitches. She thinks of the child's drawing, of the stranger's ledger note, of the wedge hammered home, of the knot that now sits proud near the grommet. She understands, with an almost physical certainty, that the house will call for these hands again, and that they, too, will answer. The moss garden temple's face is layered now with the week's efforts, some visible, some hidden, all present in the quiet architecture of care. When the world grows still enough to hear, a single footstep passes along the road beyond the lanterns. The gardener returns a borrowed tool and shares a last, brief story about a neighbor's cat who had once stolen a ribbon and worn it as a crown. Laughter, small and unforced, follows. They close the inner sliding doors and let the house's night settle around their acts. The brazier is banked. The hourglass sits with a soft heap of sand. The last teacup is set to dry. Before sleep, the innkeeper stands for a moment with the door partly open, watching steam meet morning's memory and light fold into dark. She thinks of the apprentice's hands, of the carpenter's modest mastery, of the elder's quietness. All these threads, all these small acts, are what turn a house into what the neighbors call, half in jest, half in appreciation, the Moss Garden Temple. A place where the ordinary attentions of daily life align and make a calm that looks like something old and steady. Outside, the moss keeps its watch. Stones settled, path decided, lanterns flaring softly against the hush. The garden looks less like a gift to be consumed and more like a place to be tended. The Norren's indigo patch shimmers faintly in the pooled lantern light. Its stitches throw delicate shadows onto the snow. Inside, the house breathes with the quiet of those who have been at work and will be again. If this evening has invited you to linger, to watch the slow making of a place held together by hands and choice, linger again. Return for more evenings like this.